Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I want to kind of just do a stripped back sort of video. There's not going to be any fancy graphics, there's not going to be any sort of numbered lists, anything like that. I just want to share some things that have really been on my heart recently, and the thing that I want to discuss is actually something new that I've been trying in my relationship with a lot of success. And I was thinking that, well, if it works for me, this might also be something that works well for other people, so why not share it and put it in a video, because hey, that's what I do. But what is that something new that I'm talking about? The most succinct way I could think of to describe this would be leaning in. And no, I'm not referring to the work of the COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg. I didn't actually make the connection that that is maybe where the phrase lean in got into my brain, but we're not talking about anything related to breaking glass ceilings or boss babe or you go girl sort of things in this video, not at all. What we are discussing is how you can develop deeper, more intimate connections with your long-term partnerships. Because at least for me, I've noticed there is a weird paradox that happens over the lifespan of relationships. I find that in the beginning, when you are first becoming comfortable with somebody but you're not super emotionally invested yet, it's a lot easier to share things, because essentially when you are at those beginning stages of a relationship, it's more or less like a little bit of a trial period. You can put some information out there and then you can read that reaction and say, did they react to that in the way that I was expecting? Did they respond well when I was being vulnerable, or maybe I cried around them? Did they ask me follow-up questions? Are they disgusted by the thing I just shared with them? And because of the fact you haven't developed that really deep, intimate connection yet, it's a lot easier to then take that information and say, hey, maybe I don't want to continue in this relationship on the trajectory that we were going on at that time. Maybe you share with them that you have a really important fetish for balloons that you absolutely need to have in your life or you're not going to be satisfied. And then they say, absolutely cannot do that, I'm sorry. And then maybe from there you decide you're just going to be friends. Or maybe in other situations you decide to just be friends with benefits. Or maybe you decide to walk away altogether. It really just depends on the individual situation. But no matter what, all of that involves having more flexibility with changing the trajectory of the relationship depending on how that person reacts to things that you've shared with them. However, when you have gone through that emotional investment in a relationship, when you are months, years, maybe decades into just fulfilling one relationship, not even getting into polyamory here today, folks, but even with just one relationship, when you have that much time invested there, it can feel daunting to share new things because it's going to be like a revelation for the whole relationship. You're going, oh my God, I have this really important thing I need to share and I haven't brought it up. We've been together for 8 years, and how in the world are they possibly going to understand me? They're going to think about me so differently now, and the whole relationship feels like it's hanging in the balance, because it turns out if they don't like this really important thing that you really want to have, it's like, okay, then what was I doing this entire time in this relationship if I can never have this one thing that's super important to me? What was I doing? And there's that fear of, I guess, sort of a little bit of the sunk cost fallacy of feeling like, you invested all of this time and energy and you can't get it back. And it feels like maybe your energy could have been better spent elsewhere. And that can be so very intimidating. And that's the root of the issue that I want to talk about today, is that situation where you have put a lot of time and energy into a relationship that you want to hopefully see continue, but you're worried that things you want to share with your partner might change that. So leaning in is really about taking the time to open back up to your partner again, taking the time to learn how to be comfortable expressing your emotions, your wants, your needs, and especially when those things have changed over time for maybe what you originally negotiated at the beginning of the relationship. And as I've already hinted at, this can be a lot more complicated in long-term DS relationships too. I have noticed, at least for myself and some of the other S-types I know, it can be very difficult to specifically open up to a dominant partner about what your wants and needs are. And there's a lot of baggage that goes into this. It could be because somebody is afraid of disappointing their partner, or they're afraid of being rejected, or of being replaced by another submissive, or they are worried their partner is going to be disgusted by them or isn't going to want to play with them anymore. They worry that it's going to disrupt the very fabric of their DS relationship. They worry that for some reason the person's not going to understand them or isn't going to acknowledge whatever they've said at all. And trust me, the whole being ignored thing can be a lot worse than somebody just telling you that they're not into the same thing. And I don't want to imply that it's a good thing that people have this sort of baggage going into relationships, but we're human. You know, we don't wait until we're like fully self-actualized individuals before we start pursuing romantic or sexual connection. That's simply not how we are. While I think it is a good thing that people take the time to work on themselves, to expect everybody to have done that before they get into any relationships is, I think, a little bit unrealistic. And in fact, I would rather think of relationships as a tool to motivate people to work on these things that maybe they've had issues with for years and years and years, but it's never been something that they have felt they needed to work on their own before. And even in otherwise very healthy relationships, there are so many reasons why these sorts of hang-ups can happen. It can be because of emotional baggage from previous relationships. It can be because we were never exposed to proper ways to express our feelings and our emotions by family members when we were younger. It could be because of a past that involves a history of abuse or trauma. It could be because we've simply never really shared our feelings with anyone before and we don't really know how to start. But again, it's just important to recognize that these things can be problems, so then we can go ahead and address them and hopefully improve the situation. And as well, this is not an S-type exclusive issue. Of course, normally in these videos, I do come from the perspective of somebody on the S side of the slash because that is my relationship history, but absolutely people on the D side of the slash, people who are switches, people who are vanilla, anyone really. This isn't a kink problem, this isn't a D or an S problem, it's a human problem. Because again, and I feel like I've referenced this a lot in some of my recent videos, you know, we are not all perfect humans. We do not always come into things with the most perfect information about how to communicate with others or how to have our needs known. And that's okay. Again, it's just about having a learning experience and being open to the concept that these situations can actually improve. But getting back more to the point, what have I actually been doing that has allowed me to start this leaning in vulnerability process? And I worry that this might sound a little bit too simplistic, that it might sound kind of obvious, but honestly, the answer is that I just started doing it. And I want to recognize that saying you should do it and actually doing it are two very different things, and it's a very intimidating process. And I would make an analogy here to a diving board. So, you know, especially if you're afraid of heights, you know, you're going up the diving board, you're suddenly starting to catastrophize and worry about what's going to happen. You're like, oh my God, I'm gonna get on this diving board, I'm gonna fall off, I'm gonna hit my head on the concrete, I'm gonna dive the wrong way, something horrible is gonna happen, there's gonna be a shark in the pool, like, whatever it is, no matter how irrational, it starts to kind of trickle in your mind, and you start to convince yourself that that's going to be the exact thing that happens. But when you get to the top of the diving board, you then have two options. The first option is to decide to get off the diving board, not talk about the thing that you want to talk about, which is often what people choose before they have decided to start leaning in. Or two, you decide to just say fuck it, and then you dive in and you say whatever it is that you need to say. And chances are, unless a catastrophic accident happens, you're not going to hit your head on the concrete, there's not going to be a shark in the pool, nothing bad is going to happen to you, you're just going to dive off of the board. And I just touched on this a little bit, but to emphasize, I think one of the big fears that happens that prevents us from opening up to our partners is the fear of the unknown. It's like one of the most primal human fears that we can have. You know, we don't like not knowing what we don't know, and especially if you have a tendency towards a more active brain, a more anxious brain, you'll take that lack of information and then fill it up with assumptions. You will catastrophize, you will assume, your brain will decide that the worst possible situation is the most likely situation to happen, which obviously does not map to reality. But if you haven't had practice kind of fighting back against that, it's very easy to assume, okay, yeah, that must be what's going to happen. I'm not going to risk that. I don't want to deal with that right now. And what you have to remind yourself when you're going through situations where you do want to share some vulnerability with your partner is to just remember that, do you want to be with somebody who's going to react in that worst possible way? And if you don't, isn't it better to ask and see if they have that reaction so you can make a decision about whether or not you want to continue in that partnership? They might be really mad. They might be upset with you. They might be disappointed. Or they might not be. So I would also, with this, take along the idea that they are probably not going to have the worst possible reaction. They're probably not going to share the exact same kinks or be super enthusiastic, so kind of scale your expectations a little bit there. But at the least, you should remember that your partner is probably not going to react in the worst way possible, and if they do, wouldn't you want to have that information in the first place? This doesn't mean, however, that you should just fully open up whenever you feel like it. That's another important thing to remember too, because conversations involve at least two people. There are multiple different ways that each person could come into a conversation with. So if you do want to start this, I would recommend by asking your partner, how are you doing today? Is now a good time to talk? What have you been up to? Just something so you can sort of gauge what their availability is and what their emotional state is. If you have a partner that works for Goldman Sachs and they've had a really busy, stressful day, it's probably not a good idea to suddenly leap on them and dump all of your emotions out on them and just expect them to be able to take that. If you want to have a successful conversation, the best way you can do that is to make sure that all of the parties involved are in a proper calm headspace where nobody's going to be super emotionally reactive, nobody's preoccupied by other things in their schedule, nobody's overwhelmed by stress that they've already had to deal with that day. I would also make sure that you watch sort of what language you're using to try to start this conversation. There are a few phrases, especially if you live in North America, that people will use signal bad things. So for example, if you say, I need to talk to you about something, that's code for a bad thing is about to happen. So probably don't use that one, but there are a lot of other things that you can say instead that signal you want to have a conversation, do you have time to talk tonight? Or I have something I wanted to pick your brain about, or whatever else, depending on what situation and what thing you want to talk about. There are a lot of options there. If you don't like the idea of spontaneity and you don't want to leave things up to chance, whether or not your partner is going to have the energy or the availability to have a conversation, I would recommend instead what you do is set aside time on a regular basis to have these conversations. In the world of BDSM, we usually refer to these things as porch time. And what this is it's an opportunity outside of the DS relationship or outside any other relationship structures to have a calm conversation about anything that needs to be discussed in the relationship without having repercussions for the relationship itself. So if you're in a DS relationship, it's a great opportunity for a submissive to bring something up where they're not fearing the dominant will punish them for something that they've said. Now, this is not licensed to just swear at your partner and practice horrible communication, but the idea is that it's a secure location where everybody can express their feelings in a calm and collected manner without fear of other repercussions. With this, there are a few ways you can handle it. If you have a lot of things that have built up over time and you need to get through a lot, I'd recommend using this format with almost sort of a schedule of here are the different conversations we're going to have. That could mean you start from the most difficult conversation, the most important conversation first, and work your way down. Sometimes that means you kind of work up your confidence and you start with easier things first and then go up from there, depending on what your style and preference is. And you just make sure that you have some sort of vague schedule in place, maybe once a month, twice a month, once a week, whatever works for your schedule, so all of the things that I want to talk about are going to be addressed. Because at least for me, the one thing that will make me word vomit more than anything else is a fear I'm not going to have an opportunity to have this conversation later. So when you have taken the time to make sure that you and your partner are both available for a set amount of time that has, a beginning and an end, not unlimited conversation time, but, an hour every week to discuss something, or 2 hours once a month, whatever it is, you make sure that you have that time available. And then it's a little bit of a peace of mind sort of situation. If you are dealing with deeper relationship issues, I would really recommend in those sorts of situations that you go to a professional relationship counselor. This could be a licensed therapist, this could be another form of mental health care provider. If you're looking for somebody who is kink aware that can understand those nuances of your relationship, I highly recommend you go to the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom's website. They have free resources on there to help you find different professionals that are kink aware, or maybe are even in the kink community themselves, who can understand your issues without assigning those issues to your participation in BDSM by itself. But regardless of how you decide to open up, I think there's probably going to be one thing in particular that you will notice. And that thing is that your worst fears probably aren't going to come true. The giant catastrophe that you built up in your head earlier about like, oh my God, they're gonna hate me, they're gonna break up with me, they're gonna whatever, that probably didn't happen. And it's probably all going to be okay. And at least for me, the big thing that helped me continue this journey of leaning in was being able to look at my partner, look at the conversations we've had, and go, oh, okay, and they reacted in this way, or maybe it was even kind of positive. And then that voice in my head that's going, you're going to hate me, you're going to bring them, blah, 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 all the bad negative stuff, I could say, hey, you are wrong, and here is the evidence that I have to prove that you were wrong and that we can have these conversations and it isn't the end of the world. And so sometimes it is really just a process of like, you have to, again, go off that diving board. You have to just trust that the process is going to work. And then when you can actually see that the process does work, it becomes a lot easier to then use that as evidence to silence your brain from telling you that you shouldn't do it and that's a bad idea. And if you take away anything from this video, it would be this right here, which is that the journey to a better relationship always starts with a first moment. Again, it is so difficult to start to have these conversations if you've never had them before, if it's been years, if you've invested a lot of time into a relationship, but you have to start somewhere. You don't have to start with the really big catastrophic things first. You can work up your way into more important issues from smaller issues. Maybe you just start out by like asking for specific scenes that you want. Maybe you start out with like specific requests for things that you enjoy doing together or ideas for date nights. Some people have very little input into the things that actually happen in their relationships. So if you are that person in that type of relationship, just start small, work your way up, and then eventually you can climb the mountain to get to the point where you feel comfortable discussing those big important issues. But what is most important is that you start that journey. And another curious thing that you might find through this is actually that your openness helps your partner open up as well. Something that can happen in these relationships is there can be a sort of deadlock where neither party is vulnerable yet because the other party has never been vulnerable with them. And so you have people that have a lot of secrets built up, a lot of really important things to them they've never been able to share, and neither one of them feel like they can open up. Like it's a very defensive stalemate sort of situation. And if you can kind of pass the olive branch there and say, hey, here's my vulnerability. If you listen to that, I will also listen to you too. And so that can create a sort of softening in the relationship overall. That means that everybody can be more open about what their needs are and hopefully make the situation better, not just for you, but for your partner as well, and contribute to the overall health of the relationship on all sides. Because all of this is really about developing the tools to have the relationship that both you and your partner want. I mean, think about it. If the one thing that you want more in life than anything is to be a sissy maid, why would you spend 9 years in a relationship where you never talk about that when you have the option to be open? If you want to deepen your relationship into MS, but you're worried your partner's not ready to go on that journey with you, why would you want to continue a relationship where you're never going to be able to have your slave heart fulfilled? You have to think about this a little bit in a rational way, not just purely in an emotional way where you say, hey, especially if you're monogamous, like, do you want to spend that much time and energy in one relationship where you can never have the one thing that you want? And on a more positive note of the same idea, if you can have the thing that you want, why would you spend 9 years not having it when you could have 9 years having it? The sooner you have these conversations, the better overall in the relationship. But no matter if it's been a year or 10 years or 20 years or however long, the important part is that you just start to have these conversations. If you guys have any comments or questions about this concept, please let me know down in the comment section below. Have you ever tried to do something like this before? Do you have any issues opening up with your partner? I would love to hear from you guys sort of what your situation is and if this is something you have noticed as well. If you like this video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. Link to that will be down below. That is what keeps this channel going. I have no monetization whatsoever on this channel. YouTube has permanently banned me from that. So everything that makes all of this possible is 100% through Patreon. That's what allows me to do these videos, and then also allows me to do extra content, so extra videos that are just for patrons. I also have a Discord chat, I have monthly photo shoots, lots of things, extra live streams. So if you haven't checked that out already, please do. Link to it will be down below. And if you do already support me on there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.